We can start a countdown. And 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're off.
Right. Good luck, comms.
So we're going to be starting at
That was interesting.
hello. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, so welcome. Sorry about that. So I was talking away to myself for the first couple of minutes there. So my name's Friday again, and I'll be commentating for you today. And our runner today is Fricker22. So we're going to be making our way through Escape. We're going to be getting the sword, which we got already from Uncle, and we are picking up the princess and rescuing her from the scary ball and chain guy. So this run is what we call Glitchless Dungeon Order. It's a fairly new category, a little bit of a smaller run category that we're starting to see a little bit of traction with in the last month or two. Some people beginning to run it. It's a little bit of a spin-off from the major category, No Major Glitches, which is the major and most run category of the game. But there is quite a lot of tricks in the No Major Glitches, lots of bomb jumps and skips and fun little tricks that skip lots of the game and parts of the dungeon. And also we get things like we get the Tempered Sword early on, and just things like that. So this category was made to try and run the game as intended as possible, with no glitches, no bomb jumps, none of the bigger skips that you have in the major glitches. And one of the main thing that makes it different is that you have to go through the dungeons in order, 1 through to 7. So a brief rundown of the category and how it differs from the main category and A Link to the Past. So Fricker is going to be making his way to the back half of Escape. with the princess. Going to be coming into the snake room here. Getting a little bop on the head there. Also, feel free to ask me any questions that you may have at any point in the run, and I will do my best to answer the questions. Any questions that you may have. Excuse me. So we're going to come into probably the first part of the run that causes any kind of major time loss, which is the rat key. It is completely RNG, and sometimes he can go to the right, sometimes he goes left, and unfortunately in the game to spawn rupees in the famous Chris Houlihan room, which if anyone doesn't know what the Chris Houlihan room is, it's actually a room in the game that was won by a contestant many years ago, and he won a Link to the Past contest, and his name was in the game, and that's the special room that you can end up in. Due to some, I'm not the most technical with the technical parts of it, but it could be something to do with the RAM overload or something along those lines, and you spawn a bunch of rupees. But in this category, we have banned the intentional way of setting it up. So, working our way into Eastern Palace, this is one of the first route deviations that we have from the major category in the game, and the main reason is that we need to get a lot of rupees. I think it's something about 720 rupees before we actually get to a certain part of the game. In the major category, we get that later on as we progress, but we have to have it before a specific dungeon in this game, which is a lot earlier. So the main difference with this route versus one of the major routes is the rupees. You have to get a lot of rupees early on. So making his way through the first part of Eastern Palace. Picking up some arrows. You'll see the runner from time to time maybe drop down to pick up specific items like arrows and bombs. Most of these are calculated, predestined items that we grab on the route, because the route requires a specific amount of bombs and a specific amount of arrows. And if you have not enough at some point during the run, then it can cost you a lot of time later on. So the route is very optimized, or the game in general is a very optimized game. So everything is predetermined and pre-planned to be the fastest possible way all through the game. Picking up the big chest key. That's going to allow us to open the big doors, which you'll see at the top of the screen now, and the big chests, which has all the items in the game that you need to complete the game. Each palace and dungeon will have one big key and one big chest. A very nice room, what we call gifted with greenies. Very smooth. A player of Fricker's level will usually have no issues with the first 2 or 3 dungeons in the game. Let's just head down and do what you've practiced. So we've got the arrow drop, so we have an arrow drop there. This is the first boss of the game. It's Armos. He's going to require 18 arrows and getting what we call the quick kill. So a little trick which we utilize in order to skip the red aggro animation of the Armos. Usually you kill all 5 of the Armos, and then the last one turns red, and then you have to kill him with 3 arrows or a lot of sword slashes. But the way that we have learned how to do the fight in a specific way with a specific timing, it allows us to kill the Armos before he gets to the red aggro phase. So pretty cool, pretty neat. There's a lot of little tricks like that. So we're going to be talking to Saha, who's going to give us the dash boots, which are going to make us really speedy. So we're going into what we call Saha rupees now. Again, this is another deviation from the main route, mainly because we need rupees. We're going to be seeing again for regulars of the game. Usually we would do a trick which we call spin speed. So it's holding down B, which is the sword animation, and then when the sword is fully charged, usually Link will do a spinning animation with a spinning attack. But we utilize it in the main category to do a little trick called spin speed, which basically makes Link go super, super fast. But again, it's a glitch which we have banned in the game, so there's a lot more screens where we do dashing rather than spin speed. Like this is another screen here, we would utilize the spin speed, but again, with the glitchless category, just regular movement. And it's on some screens it can save quite a lot of time, but this screen, for example, it saves roughly around 23, 24 frames. But on some other screens throughout the game, it can save many, many seconds. So picking up the book from the library, that's going to allow us to communicate with certain or read certain tablets on the map, which is going to allow us to progress through the game. Basically, you can't get very far without the book, so. And the light world, if you're following kind of a glitchless route, is basically predetermined because you need to get an item in the dungeon that we have coming up now, or the palace that we have coming up now, in order to progress to the next one. So the light world is actually pretty predetermined in this game. But once you get to the dark world, it's definitely a lot more open concept, and there's a kind of a guide that they've put up with numbers in terms of where they kind of tell you maybe a suggested way to go, but you can definitely go investigating and do other dungeons in different orders. So we're going to be sticking to the regular route, or the intended route. So it's going to be getting a key bunk there. So again, this dungeon here is for the most part straightforward, coming up to the first room that can be a little bit tricky. We call it the cannonball room. It is RNG dependent, but you can avoid the RNG. So you see there, deciding to redash. You don't want to take a hit from there if you can help it. You also see he went back for the red rupee. Rupees are very important in this route, so any rupees that you get that are free, you definitely want to grab them. Very nice desert so far. Making his way across the other side to the famous pot room. This is where we're going to start to see some pickups. We get 10 arrows in this room. It's a very nice room, and also picking up the 5 rupees as well. Excuse me. So desert is our first palace or dungeon that requires us to exit one part of the palace and get into another part of the palace. There is a couple of dungeons like that in the game, but this is the first major one. I remember growing up as a kid playing that, and I thought that was just the coolest thing. You know, having to leave, you know, one part and do one part of the dungeon and then leave and then go to a completely separate part of the dungeon. I thought that was always really, really cool. So he's going to be coming up to the first major fight in the game, which can definitely be time management, and that is Lanmolus. He has 3 flying snakes, as I call them, and we tried to get it in 2 cycles, but it can definitely go south and end up with around 5, 6, even sometimes more than that. So very nice. Just gonna hopefully clean this up for a 3 cycle. Very, very nice. So 3 cycle is basically, most people are happy with that. That's basically what we go for is 3 cycle. A 2 cycle is a bonus, or very, very good players are a lot better, obviously, getting consistent 2 cycles, but anything 2, 3, even an early 4 is good. But basically, I believe it's around 5 to 6 seconds for each cycle. So you can see if you get a 2 cycle versus a 5 cycle, you know, you can be 15 to 18 seconds down during your run. So obviously that's a big part of the light world, or the first half of the run. So in the major route and the no major glitches, we would utilize a trick called fake flippers. So fake flippers allows us to swim in the deep water before we have the finger webs, which is an item you get later, using a specific setup and trick in order to do that. Obviously, with the glitchless route, we have banned that, so we get to do a screen which not a lot of people see very often who play this game regularly. And this is where the paths meet up. The fake flipper trick saves around 8 seconds versus the glitchless route. Yes, so Kane was mentioning there, the glitches that we use, or most of the glitches that we use, are only available on a specific ROM, and that's the JP Japan 1.0 version of the game. So obviously, runners have very, very in-tuned muscle memory, and it is extremely, extremely difficult when you've been running this game a long, long time to suddenly break everything that you know and just stop doing glitches. So obviously they're banned. So to help runners in this category, we use a 1.2 cart, which has many of, not all of them, but many of the glitches you can't actually do. So very nice Death Mountain here. There is a lot of RNG in this Death Mountain here. We call them cabbages, basically the big green boulders that we have coming down are completely random. They can completely screw you if you're not watching, or they just sometimes do that anyways. There's really not much they can do about it. We call it the old cabbage party. So obviously getting to Hera with 3 hearts, sometimes you can come in here with 1, and it makes this palace a lot harder. This is definitely where the runs in terms of where some of the better players, the more consistent runners, will start to pull away from some of the mid-tier runners. Is Hera. There's definitely a lot of time to be lost and saved in Hera. A lot of different tricks that we use. There's a lot of RNG in it, and a very tough boss fight as well. One of the toughest boss fights, I'd say, definitely in the first half anyways, which you will see coming up. This is the infamous tile room. This is probably the slowest room, probably the slowest room in the game. There's absolutely nothing that you can do with these tiles, except from sit there and, you know, maybe have a drink of water, do some hydrating. So utilizing menus. So we have to use the menu a lot in the game, and you will see that he uses his menus in very specific locations. And that is either because to read RNG was the main thing that we would use it for. We have to switch to a specific item anyways, so we want to use that menu as best as possible. So see, picking up the arrows there, you'll see that, you know, those arrows are really important to us. So taking the time just to drop back and make sure he picks them up. Welcome, Tepidino. How are you doing? Tepidino is another runner who's been running GDO and is going to be doing, I believe, a GDO run for for another marathon there. You'll see that he went to go up to do what we call the bomb jump and accidentally hitting the bumper. He's not usually meant to hit that bumper, but sometimes it happens. So he... And again, that was complete muscle memory. He didn't actually have to hit the bumper, but like I said, the muscle memory is very, very strong. And usually we dash past there on our way to... Basically, we only go up there one time. But in GDO, we have to go up there twice. So basically, muscle memory just kicked in and tried to do the bumper skip. And now you're seeing it the second time, so no problems with it there. So coming on to Molarm here, very nice taking his time to get onto the pit there. Sometimes what can happen is if you don't take your time there, he can bounce you. He bounces you with his sword. Oh, we got double hit there. So finishing up Molarm. Molarm can be very, very cruel. He does have some parts of his fight that you try to dash through his head, and we call it frame roll. And basically, there's just nothing you can do about it. Sometimes he hits you, and sometimes he doesn't. But definitely a very, very good fight there. So now that we have all of the pendants, we are going to be picking up a special sword. A sword that only the person with all the pendants can get. Pretty sure most of you know what that is. If not, you're about to find out in Japanese. So you'll see he's going to be utilizing free pulls, what we call. So there's certain game or certain objects in the game that when you pull them, they drop rupees. So in this case, the tree, when he pulled it, dropped 20 rupees. But what someone found out is that if you pull this tree and you kill 4 enemies without getting hit, and you pull another tree, the next tree will then spawn 80 rupees, 4 reds. It's a pretty cool thing. We call it tree rupees. It's basically changed the route at some point in the game to where we pick up rupees. So without that tree pull, we would have to get rupees from somewhere else. So yeah, for sure. Yeah, the crow snipe. So there's 3 main enemies that we kill after that first one. Crow snipe or bird shoot, as some people call it, is one option, probably the most popular. There is a crab dash, which is there's another bush crab up above that screen, and then there's also a pickle. So he was meant to kill that bird, so he's probably going to do a backup here with a beam. That's that there. So another reason that we dash through enemies is it preserves the drop. So all the enemies in the game have a prize pack. And the prize packs, basically, they follow on from each other. So for a certain kinds of enemies in the game, it goes blue, green, blue, red. and they drop rupees in that order. And then we have some enemies in the game, basically they have arrows and bombs that drop in consecutive order. So once you get down in level, or once you get up in level, sorry, you begin to start tracking where each prize pack is. I believe there's 6 or 7 different prize packs, and there's like 2 or 3 of them that we definitely keep track of during the run. And dashing through enemies prevents the items from actually spawning on the screen, which can be very, very beneficial for someone who is trying to get arrows later on in the run. And then there's some of us who are very good runners who just don't track prize packs. Like Kane is mentioning there. There's definitely 1 or 2 that you definitely want to keep track of. But other than that, you can get by without that. So we're making our way upstairs to Agate Tower. A lot of dark rooms, and this is the first room with some major RNG. Sometimes these guards just decide to aggro, especially if you do that. But getting by no problem. I'm going to put in some cool stuff for you while I explain what this means in a second. So we're going to be coming up to the first, well, not the first, but basically the major part of the run that deals with RNG, everyone's beloved Aghanim. So Aghanim, it basically is the type of attack that he's going to do. He's going to fire either an energy ball or a blue ball. You need a total of 6 energy balls in order to defeat him, and then after every 4 shots, he is going to do a lightning cycle, which you cannot avoid the first one. But you can avoid the second one if you get the right blue balls. That is 1 or 2 blue balls. Each cycle is roughly around 6 seconds, and a lightning cycle is roughly around 6 seconds. So the probabilities is in the chat there of each one, 0 being the lowest and 15 being the highest. 14 and 15 being very extremely highly unlikely, and Fricker going down the right side, I don't think I've seen someone go down the right side before. Yeah. Not sure if he would usually do that in his run. I don't think so, but obviously doing it for show. Doing it for the show. Doesn't waste any time. It's the same time no matter which side you go. So we're starting off with no blue balls so far. That is exactly what we want. And that's our first blue ball of the fight. And we have 2 blue balls. So we're hoping for really 2 at this point. 3 would be also pretty good at this stage too. That's going to 3 blue balls now. So we're hoping for energy balls all the way now. That's 4. So now we're hoping for 2 more lightning cycles. Sorry, for 2 more energy balls, 1 more lightning cycle. Keep it nice and low. It's 5. 6. This is getting into the realms of unfair. So 6 blue balls, so that will, compared to 0 blue ball run, for example, will lose roughly 42 seconds. So obviously you can see that this is a big major part of the run, where I believe 0 blue balls versus, you know, something like 7, 8, 9, 10, you can lose anywhere from, you know, I think it's anywhere from 6 seconds from 0 to 1 to something like a minute and a half you know, when you get right up there to 10 blue balls plus. So it's not very common to get up past 7, but still, you know, 6 versus 0 or 1 is, you know, 35 to 40 seconds around that mark. So, and there's absolutely nothing that we can do about it. It's also part of what makes this game so challenging is that obviously it takes great skill to get down and post a very good time, but you are also at the mercy of the RNG for Aghanim. And there's also one more part of the fight later on, which has another set of RNG. It's not quite as bad, but it is still can be quite costly. So 2 major parts of RNG, and some obviously lots of other parts of RNG in the game as well that can cost you time too. It all adds up. So now that we are into the dark world, obviously mirroring the light world, we're going to be entering our first dungeon. We're going to be paying a little monkey called Kiki, who for some reason decides to take $110 from you to jump on a switch. And that is why we needed to have so many rupees at this point to basically pay this little monkey to open the door for us. Exactly. You keep paying it. So why would he not? At least he hasn't upped his price though. So a lot of pod is basically routing keys. There's a lot of doors and keys in pod, and basically you go through the dungeon I think 3 times, getting all the keys so that you can make it to the big chest. A couple of different routes to do actually in this dungeon. They're very, very close in time. One just happens to have more bombs in the route, so obviously it's more beneficial, or most people go for the new route that has more bombs in it, but if bombs aren't a concern, you can certainly do the other way as well. So we're going to be coming up to, again, one of the big variances between No Major Glitches. This is where we would expect to see a trick called the Hammery Up, which would allow us to skip to this chest over on the left-hand side there. We use a trick called the bomb jump, which basically explodes us over to that big chest, and you can see how much of this dungeon he's about to skip by getting the Hammery Up. And another reason that we do it in this run is we actually need rupees, because we're going to have to get the finger webs later on. So we drop down into the basement, and not wanting to take another hit there. But basically we want to get all the rupees and the key and head back. But obviously if you were just doing kind of another route without the rupees, I believe it's something like optimally like 45 seconds, I believe is kind of the time save using that bomb jump. So you can see it skips quite a significant part of the dungeon, and with the glitchless route we're getting more of the dungeon in. Now that we have the hammer, we can progress on to the latter part of the dungeon. Using a well-timed arrow there to hit the switch, allowing us to get into this room with the switch down. Coming into Mimics 1 always looks really cool to watch this room. Or mimics in pod, I guess. So you can see usually dashing through, but electing to grab arrows. Again, the importance of arrows in this route. Coming up to our first turtles here, we call it the turtle party. Slight RNG here sometimes that gives you a down aggroing turtle. Obviously you see him looking for rupees. Yep. So he's just I think he's short about 15 or so rupees. They're getting his rupees that he needed there. So usually we do, or not usually, but a new trick that was found for this fight was using the spin speed tech that we talked about earlier. And someone found out that when you do it in this fight, it makes the hitbox harder. Or bigger, sorry. So definitely something that we have been using, or most people have moved over to recently. So obviously in this category, band, so we are using just hammer hits, like regular hammer hits, and spins and slashes. And some people still elect to use that as well. But it's cool to see that in a game that's been played for many, many years, we're still finding tech out all the time. There's always stuff found every week or so. There's some new stuff found. It's a time save here and a time save there. Not often you get a big major one like this, I would say. So I'd say this is probably one of the big major finds in the last couple of months or so. No issues there coming through pod. So we're going to be doing a cool little fricker dash, I call it, something that he came up with during another category which we run called low percent, which basically avoids getting hit by these annoying enemies because they can sometimes hit you, sometimes not, just depending on where they're at with their jump animation. And again, we call it lottery because you're literally rolling the dice. So again, this is where we have another major route deviation, where we would usually go straight down here and we would head towards Thieves Town because we want to get there in the no major glitches category so that we can complete Thieves Town and get the Tempered Sword as fast as possible, because the Tempered Sword allows us to damage things and enemies in the game a lot better than the Master Sword does. But obviously in this category, we are sticking to the intended route. So that means that we have to go and get flippers, which is why we needed to get all of the rupees beforehand. We need 500 rupees to get the flippers, which is needed to basically complete the Swamp Palace dungeon, which is the next intended dungeon in order. Getting a famous bonk, as we call it, every speedrunner's nightmare. Wastes anywhere from a second to, basically it's about a second every time you do that, so obviously you don't want to do that very much, but it happens almost every run, and yeah, it usually causes to say some naughty words that we don't like, so. So here we go. This is Mr. King Zora. He is the Fish Mafia, who charges you a ridiculous amount of rupees, 500 rupees for a pair of flippers, so that you can swim. pretty handy to have, pretty pricey, but I mean, he pays a hard bargain, and he's got a lot of family out there to feed by the looks of it, so I guess you pay up or you're not getting flippers. So you can now use the warps, which are in the game, strategically placed in certain parts of the game. And this swim here is a swim that most people who play the game will not really ever see. There's no real reason in any other category, I believe, than this one to use a portal and swim across like that. So that's kind of the neat thing about this category, is that it definitely opens up some new screens, and there's some bosses that we fight with lesser armor and swords than in the major categories. So partly what makes this run a little bit harder in terms is some of the boss fights. So getting what we call a quick warp there, so hey, trying to that is some muscle memory ripping in there. So we usually do what we call a block delete there, where we delete the block. So if you push the block and you spam the Y button, or you spam the item use button, it basically just deletes the block. The block just completely disappears and you can walk right through it. So walked in there, and thankfully using the 1.2 cart, I believe it stops you from doing that. So realizing partway through and then having to reset the blocks again. So most of this dungeon is not too different because the game kind of expects you to still have the Master Sword at this point. Later on, you have the Tempered Sword, but I believe there's really not too much difference with the smaller enemies in the game, but there's definitely a huge difference in the boss fight, which we'll talk about when we get there. So you'll see Link actually, or Fricker deciding to grab the ledge. Putting Link in that animation and grabbing the leg actually saves time. There's lots of little things that you probably, as a casual player or runner or someone who maybe doesn't run the game, won't notice. But every single room and movement in the game is for a specific reason. And grabbing that ledge there was intended to save time on the water animation. I'll try and point out some more as I see them. Doing very good to dodge the enemy RNG there. And getting to the can sometimes be a speedrunner's nightmare, is that switch here. So basically you have to hit the switch on the way out, and if you don't, which anyone who's ever speedrun this game has definitely done at some point, I can assure you that, you basically get all the way to 3 or 4 or 5 rooms ahead, go all the way upstairs and drop back down again and realize, oh no, I have not hit the switch. And you have to go all the way back again and hit the switch. So obviously in this run it's still fairly in the middle, but Swamp is done a little bit later on in the major category, so it basically is, if you're on a really good run, it's going to lose you a lot of time. Remembering that he can item dash there, pretty nice. Again, we would use an item dash usually to item dash through the pods, but not going to be using that. That's actually one little part of this dungeon that's slightly different. Usually with the Tempered Sword, when you dash off the ledge there, you kill that tech type. But in Master Sword, you don't have enough damage stats to kill it. So you actually have to jump off, poke them, and then you actually have to deal with them. you forgot to hit the switch, Dead Link. No, it's in the intended developer order. So if you were to go outside right now and hit the map, you would show that the dungeons are labeled 1 to 7, and that is, I guess, the developer intended order. And that's kind of, I guess, how they designed the game to play. But on most of the other categories, it's done nowhere near in that order. You know, we do 1, and then we do 3. I think we do 4, and then we do 2 almost like at some point, and then we do, yeah, so like we flip and flop all over the place. And yeah, everyone's hit the switch at some point. It's soul destroying when you don't realize it, and you have to get there and you realize that, oh, I haven't hit it. Welcome to the stream, Monterey Games. So coming up to the Argus fight here. So this is the fight that you will see a little bit differently, very different between having the Master Sword and not. So in the regular routes where you have the Tempered Sword, we will utilize a trick called hook dashing, where you actually hold B and Y and A all on the same frame. So you're having B held down and using the basically the same thing as the spin speed that we talked about earlier. And it's a very, very difficult trick where you kill all the puffs before he does his spinning cycle. And obviously in Master Sword that's not possible, and we do our best to keep it to a 1 cycle. A 2 cycle is still very good with Master Sword, so it's definitely a big time difference having the Tempered Sword in here versus the Master Sword. It can be as much as 10 to 20 seconds depending on how the fight goes, but Frigger having a very, very good fight there, and doing a triple puff grab spin, which is the optimal or fastest way that you can do the fight with the Master Sword without using any glitches. I'm not sure if there's a way that you can use glitches or the hook speed with the Master Sword. I can't say that I've ever seen it. But Mike Monkey coming in. Thank you so much for the $178 donation. Very much appreciated. It's very kind of you. I actually had to have a think about where he's going there, because I quite honestly had no idea. I haven't run this myself for a little while, so I'm actually trying to remember the route myself. So yeah, deviating a little again from the route. Basically from now on, the route is going to be completely different, and most of it when you get to the parts of the route, it's the same, but obviously, you can hear the frustration from Fricker as he does about 5 menus. That's what we call menuing costs roughly around a second each time you pull up that menu bar. So obviously, you don't want to pull that menu up as much as possible. Doing it 3 or 4 times is usually it's uncommon for a runner of Fricker's level, but I know Fricker's been running a lot of different categories recently, and on emulator and console as well. So there's a lot of jumping back and forth, and menus are extremely difficult. Basically, you have to get to the point where it's muscle memory, that when you're learning, you know, the main whatever category you choose, learning the menus is the real final boss of the game. And you get to the point basically where you don't even think about it. You push pause and you do the inputs. And obviously, Fricker been running the game for many, many years, as a lot of runners are. When you go to do a different category, well, obviously all the items are mixed up, so your muscle memory just takes you there automatically, and you end up on the wrong item. Probably one of the hardest things about running multiple categories at the same time. So heading the back way to Skullwoods. Oh, that's interesting. I've actually never seen anyone dash through that bush before. That's pretty cool. I'm gonna have to steal that one. It's always good to learn something when you watch a runner. If you pay close attention, you can learn from anyone. So that was a cool little thing that I learned here. So this room here is the mummy room, and this room can eat you alive. These mummies are no holds barred. They do 2 hearts of damage, and they can trap you in a corner and basically knock the hell out you. So leaving here with all your hearts is, usually you're over the moon with that. Even taking, 2 hearts is not too bad. So, but you can sometimes leave there with 1 heart if you have a really bad room. So he's going to be dropping down to pick up the big chest the normal way. Usually we would jump across the little pits that you see below. We're going to be bonking across them here, but we would use what we call another bomb jump to bomb jump across there to save us having to do what Fricker just did there. So getting obviously skull is one of these dungeons that 9 times out of 10 it goes well, but that can happen to you. And if you add that in with the mummy room, when it goes bad, you can sometimes be coming into the second half of Skull with only 3 hearts, and then the boss isn't any easier. So, and he's got a Master Sword, so the Master Sword boss takes twice the amount of hits that it does with the Tempered, and it's definitely a lot more difficult. Probably one of the most difficult fights of the route, for sure. That is what we call the Mummy Hellway. Very, very nice Mummy Hellway. That is very, very difficult. Made it look very, very easy, but that is a room that is takes a lot of practice. Funnily enough, using the spike there, we actually hit the mummy into the spike to get extra damage. So it allows us to kill the mummy with 2 hits into the spike rather than... So utilizing spin attacks here when he can. Getting rough RNG here. This is pretty bad RNG here. He's getting stuck on the spike. So the thing about this fight is when Moth gets hit into the spikes, I believe it was a dev code error or a coding error somewhere, but basically it cancels out the damage. So when you hit him into the spikes, it does 0 damage. So part of what makes Moth so hard is that you have to hit him, but you also have to hit him and not hit him into the spikes, while also dodging the spikes while you have the Master Sword. So usually the fight is over in a few seconds with the Tempered Sword, because we use a trick where we are able to get 2 hits on him right away, and then he just requires 2 more hits. But obviously we can't use the double hit, and he requires 8 full hits to kill him, and none of those hits can be on the spikes. And then obviously the longer you get into the fight, the spikes start flying across the screen, and it can get pretty scary in there sometimes. But he got some really rough RNG where Moth was in the corner, wouldn't come out. He was scared and just got pummeled into the spikes, and unfortunately wasn't doing any damage for those hits. But through the fight, no problem. Going to be heading down to Thieves Town next. A different way than what we would usually go to Thieves Town. Very nice menuing there. So Thieves Town is, for the most part, I'd say it's one of the easier dungeons in terms of there's really not too much RNG apart from one major room in the game which can cost you a lot of time. Most of this is straightforward. There's a couple of, we call these Zazak RNGs, but most of them are avoidable and you learn to avoid them with practice. But there is one major room, we call it Hellway, and you will see why. Basically a bunch of enemies in the game that just go whatever way they want. They can block your path and there's really nothing you can do about it. Even the most practiced people in the world will get absolutely spanked about in Hellway. So yeah, so much health. Coming up to the Hellway room now, you will see why. Sometimes it can be very smoothly. And he's gonna, wow, see, okay, that is what we call the God Pixel, and then that's what we call an amazing Hellway. Basically, there's one specific pixel that you can dash right up the middle, which will allow you to dodge all of the spikes and go through the door, but you are still at the mercy of the enemies in the game. That takes around 4 seconds to dash through that room. If they block your path, you can end up in all sorts of trouble and can take anywhere from 8 to 10 seconds to get out of the room. So losing 6 seconds on one room is very punishing for a speedrunner. So made it look very easy though. Very nice hammer kill there. So heading up to get the maiden. Definitely as a kid, I thought this was one of the coolest dungeons in the game in terms of what they did with it. So picking up the maiden, I'm not going to spoil a surprise for anyone that is hasn't seen it before, but pretty cool stuff. And it also has some of the coolest art. There's a piece of artwork that's done by a fan that, for me, is one of the best Zelda arts I've ever seen. And it's to do with the blind and the maiden, so I could say this is definitely one of my favorite, probably, dungeons in any game that I ever played growing up. So he's going to be coming through into the boss room, and as you see, the maiden is actually turning into Blind, who is the boss of the dungeon. So obviously earlier on you see that he had to bomb the floor. The reason that he bombed the floor is so that the light could come through. If you come into this room, which you have access to at any point once you get the key, it's just an empty room with no light. So this boss is also scripted. So by scripted, I mean it can be done the same way every time if you learn to fight. It's 9 hits, 3 on phase 1, 3 on phase 2, 3 on phase 3, and Fricker showing us exactly how it's done with no issues. And if you do not know how to do that fight, i.e. fighting him unscripted, that can definitely be a tough fight. He starts firing fireballs everywhere, and you're trying to guess where they're going and dodge them, and then he goes to the other side of the room, and yeah, it can go south. So definitely learning the scripted part of that fight is well worth it. So Fricker getting a nice gold there on his split there. Very nice. Thank you so much for the donation, Deadlink SR, of $50. Very appreciated. Thank you for tuning in. So we're going to be picking up a little frog. And this frog turns into a little dwarf, who we drop off to his buddy, The other dwarf, his little hammer banging homie. Said it's so bad. Anyway, so now he's got his little buddy back. We're going to pay him 10 rupees and he's going to upgrade our sword. He's going to give us a nice, shiny tempered sword, which is going to allow us to do some more damage, which is going to take some bosses in the game a lot less time to kill. So we are heading up to Death Mountain to pick up something that we need. And it happens to be right at the top of the mountain. Usually we would be using the spin speed here, but obviously the spin speed is not allowed, so we will be utilizing nice time dashes. So you'll see, we'll talk about quick warps. So these portals in the game take about 1 second if you're not on a specific pixel in order to transition from the dark world to the light world and vice versa. But I think it's the specific pixels you can land on in the game that if you land on them, you actually can cut the time in half. I believe it's 30 frames of time save every time you land on one of those quick warp pixels. So that's half a second every time you transition between the light world and the dark world. So it's quite an extensive amount of time. So you will see that we went up and used the book, and you will also see that he called in the bird there. And that's actually very specific. He is doing that to change the altitude variable of the game in order to hit this enemy in a specific place like that. Pretty cool. Not something you probably notice just regularly watching, but like I said, everything in this game is done for a reason, for the most part, to effect change later on. So coming into Ice Palace, this is definitely the biggest, by far, change in the route. There's a lot of tricks that have been found. Basically, the one that we use in Ice Palace, yeah, the altitude variable is a very specific thing. It allows us to do some glitches in some other categories too. I'm just touching the surface of it with that, but there's a lot to it. But basically, Ice Palace and no major glitches or and a lot of other categories, we utilize what's called the bomb jump. The bomb jump allows us to skip a lot of the dungeon. We're talking like about 3 to 4 minutes of the dungeon. Biggest dungeon that's affected by this route. Because basically you're about to come into this next room here and you will see that the pegs will be down. And anyone who did this as a kid will know that it's a maze of running around Ice Palace trying to get the pegs up and down to get into the boss fight. What someone figured out is you could just keep the pegs up and bomb jump right across the Ice Palace and basically skip all of what we're about to do now. Take a little drink of water here. So making his way through Ice Palace, so a lot of these rooms we will never ever really see in a regular run. But basically having to loop around the dungeon twice in order to get all the keys and the blocks in the right order that we need in order to progress. Obviously anyone who played this as a kid will probably know that we all spent about an hour in Ice Palace running around not knowing what to do. And this is just reliving some of those memories. Going round and round and round. This is very nice routing for Fricker though. Fricker spent a fair bit of time optimizing this category. And definitely showing through Ice Palace. Because when this category came up within the basically, so I mean it's about less than a year old, so it's fairly new, and basically Ice Palace was one of the biggest dungeons that needed completely rerouted because no one had really ever run it before, so not to this extent, so cool to see it all in action. Oh, nice with the hook there too. One of the things about this category that's different too is that the big chest here is usually it would cost a lot of time in a regular run to grab that chest, but in this category you can definitely grab it. So yeah, I got a little bit just showing you how tough Ice Palace can actually be even for an experienced runner. Go back to where we were at a little bit ago and continuing on. Now he will be heading back upstairs and the switches should be in the right order. And we will be moving on to probably one of the hardest bosses of the game, which is the cold stair fight. So basically, you'll notice that his magic is a little bit low, so we need to have full magic in order to kill the boss of this dungeon. So he's going to have to pick up some magic from somewhere. Yeah, trying to work that out. Yeah, looks like he's short one small magic. Probably going to farm one here. Or grab. Yep, you can grab one from here. There we go. Getting bunny beamed. We're back on track. It's definitely a lot to remember. This dungeon is it's a very difficult dungeon no matter what category you're doing. A lot of tricky rooms and enemies, and you have the ice physics to deal with too. Ooh, a little bit scary there, but that's fine. You can see that at this stage of the game expects you to have blue mail. So obviously, us not having blue mail means that any time that a puff hits us, we get absolutely smacked around and does 4 hearts of damage, with the ice drops doing 2. So that is why it's a scary fight. It is a scripted fight, that can go wrong. So it's basically it's a scripted fight, but it is still very difficult to do it at the same time every time. And we want to trap the puffs into the corner and basically stop them from separating and don't give them time to basically do what they do best, which is fly around the room and cause havoc. Basically, one just got away there, so he was able to get it under control pretty quickly. But sometimes that fight can go really, really south, and you can end up with puffs all over the screen. You've got ice drops coming down, you've got very low hearts, and you basically have to run around the screen trying to not get hit while slashing at the same time. But dealing with it just fine. Moving on to Meyer. Meyer is, for the most part, a straightforward dungeon, but there are one or two things in the dungeon which can be quite scary and take a lot of damage. But there's really only this bird is not often, but if it does hit you, it takes a lot of damage. And taking any damage in Meyer regularly is not a good thing because yeah, we do not like that bird. If you hadn't realized. Very nice room. That is one of the slickest rooms in the game, in my opinion. Always nice for someone to crush it in a run and for new people to see it. Very difficult to do that room over and over again with really good consistency, but nailing it, no problem. So first little small part of RNG here with the fireball, which allows us to just dash down there without the laser beam getting in your face. This is the second part of the dungeon, probably the room that can make the dungeon go south pretty quickly. That is a slug bomb. They do 4 hearts of damage and they are frightening, and there's a whiz as well, so those things do 4 hearts of damage too. Again, usually we don't have to deal with them in the regular categories because of a glitch that we use where you push the block, and if you push the block as the block is moving, if you use the fire rod, you will actually shoot the fire rod through the block and hit the fire torch. So basically we usually just go bang bang bang. You don't ever have to deal with the wizards, the whiz robes, but obviously pushing the blocks manually, the whiz robes come into play, and yeah, they tank 4 hearts. So he's going to have to farm hearts. It's somewhere, or he's going to do the bridge key. Yeah. Well, I guess we're not doing spooky, so but usually what we would do is we would tank damage to get a key later on. So in a couple of rooms time, thanks for the good luck, Fox. So in a couple of rooms time, you'll see that there's a chest that you can get, and it basically allows you to skip about 12 seconds or so from the key that Fricker had to grab. But when you do take damage, like we talked about earlier, it definitely affects the run because you no longer can do the fast way, or you're definitely leaving it up to chance. Because you need to have a certain amount of hearts in order to fight Vitreous and do it the fast way. Are we hoping for a heart there? There we go, nice. So we like to have a minimum of 5.5 hearts. That's cutting it pretty close. 7 is usually where you like to be. Obviously, anything more than that in a bonus. So taking 4 hearts of damage for an enemy in Mire is... Yeah, so... It's interesting. So I think muscle memory kicked in there. He was doing setup for what we call spooky. So we were talking about the altitude variable earlier on with the bird. So usually we would use that same altitude variable in this dungeon, except what the bird does is it actually allows us to use the fire rod, and by shooting the fire rod in a specific place, it actually hits the switch up in another room, and we use it in all three of these rooms, which allows us to hit the switch without doing what Fricker is doing now, bombing the wall, dashing up to the top there, and it saves quite a bit of time. About 12 seconds or so. We're coming up to Vitreous. Again, this is another scripted fight with some small amounts of RNG in it. No problems there. Perfect fight. Yeah, I've never actually seen that. That's pretty cool. So no problems there. And through Misery Mire. So we're getting sort of back to the point where we're going to be meeting up with the regular route here. Basically, Mire, Turtle Rock, Ganon, Ganon's Tower, and Aghanim, with the Ganon fight at the end. The difference with this category is because the game intended you to use the silver arrows to kill Ganon at the end, we have included it in this category. So one of the rules of the category is that you must kill Ganon with the silver arrows. Because in most of the other categories in the game, we use a trick which is called Silverless Ganon, where we do specific timings on the last phase of the fight in order to hit Ganon and do damage to him, which basically allows us to skip having to get the gold sword and the silver arrows, which saves a huge amount of time. It's around 70 seconds or something like that. I think 60 to 75 seconds. I can't remember, but it's a significant amount of time. But in this category, we require it. So runners must get these silver arrows. The gold sword is the choice of the runner. It is technically slower to get them, and by a few seconds, but it does definitely make the last part of the dungeons a little bit easier because of having the gold sword. And that's a very good point, Fox. Yeah, he just realized. No, you basically want to get them there because you're heading up to TR, and once you head up to TR, you're not coming back down again. So just basically muscle memory kicking in there again. So the big bomb costs us 100 rupees. And we cannot dash with this bomb. The minute that you dash with the bomb, you will let the bomb go. The bomb goes on a timer. Oh, the bomb goes on a timer. And once it gets to 0, it goes to a very special place, which we want to take the bomb, which only it can blow up. And then there is a very lovely fairy who's going to beef up some of our equipment that we have. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess having these silvers is a pretty big time save in GT. Though I think silvers is about 7 seconds faster than not having silvers for GT. If you're doing like for like. Yeah, yeah, we there's a yeah, some not sure where he was going for that one. Yeah, the basically the time save comes from Mimics 1 is slightly faster and definitely easier than the Mimics 1 and 2 because you only have to fire one arrow. The main time saves come from not just from using them in Lamo 2, but what that allows you to do is skip the magic after torches. So you basically just walk straight upstairs and use the torches. Whereas obviously if you use the fire rod for Lamo, you have to dash across the room and pick up the magic. So that I think that room alone is something like 2 or 3 seconds. It's a pretty big time save for using the arrows. So coming into Turtle Rock, this is where the run starts to get a little bit scarier. Mainly, well, that's a little bit unfortunate. Mainly because of a couple of reasons. Obviously, getting deep into the run. Um, Obviously, sometimes if you're on a very good pace, you might have a little bit of nerves, and everything in this damage does a boatload of damage. So most of the items or enemies in this game doing around 4 hearts of damage because obviously the game expects us to have a little bit better armor, and we don't have better armor. So we're running through the game with the green armor or green tunic, and yeah, everything that hits like a tank. So we are hoping to get a fairy here. Again, we talked about the prize packs. So we actually preserved the fairy till this point right here, and we hope to get it, and we didn't. But we will get another chance later on. The reason we like to have it for this is because these chomps can be one of the scariest rooms in the game. Fricker making it look very easy, but that room can go south very, very fast. They're very unpredictable. They just shoot out like a mad dog. Go woof. And yeah, they can do 4 hearts every single time. So you can definitely enter that room with 13 hearts and leave with 1 if you're not careful. And doing the rest of the dungeon with anything less than 4 hearts is not really where you want to be, because it means you cannot take hits from any of these enemies coming up here, like these pokies here. They do 4 hearts of damage, getting the fairy and the bunny beam. And there's a couple of rooms with pokies in them. And then there's going to be a crystal roller, which we have to skip as well, which does 4 hearts of damage. And then there's all sorts of stuff that basically does a lot of damage in this dungeon. So it's definitely one of the dungeons which takes the probably the longest to get really, really good at. It's when you start running this game and you start playing this, the difference in times between some of the good players and some of the the newer players can be as much as 2, sometimes 3 minutes. It's a very, very tough dungeon when you start off. The same with Ganon's Tower as well. Basically, from Turtle Rock right through to Ganon is an extremely, extremely difficult segment to be very, very good and very fast at. So. But Fricker got lots of health here, so shouldn't have any problems now. Going to beat the roller, which is nice, has the beams to do so, and that's saving some more time. And on to the dark cave, I'm coming up to one of the skips of the game, which we call the laser skip. The laser skip is allowed in this category, mainly because it's we try to like keep the game, you know, to a point where it was policeable. You can't ban every single type of movement taken. Really, this is just basically dashing. You know, you're just basically dashing past this laser. So there's really not, you can't really ban stuff like that. And there's a couple other things like it pumping, for anyone who knows what pumping is. I mean, you can't really ban that. And there's a few other things that, we try to keep it as intended and as glitchless as possible, but there's just so much stuff in this game, little movement text that you can't really police all that much. So, but for the most part, it's a fairly really good, enjoyable category. I've had a lot of fun running it, and definitely a lot more people running it as of late. So it's really cool to see. So coming on to Trinex here, he requires 5 hits on the left and 5 hits on the right. Obviously, he needs to use the Ice Rod on the Fire Head and the Fire Rod on the Ice Head. And sometimes a runner will actually forget the Ice Rod, and you don't usually find out until you get to here. And it's pretty soul destroying because you get into the boss fight and you realize, oh, I can't kill him. And at that point, you either, it's rip run, or you can mirror out and go get the Ice Rod and finish the run. But thank you so much, Abel Keen, for the $20.28 donation. Very much appreciated. Thanks for all your support. Thanks for all the donations during the stream. I think we're up to around $200 or so for the stream. So thank you so much for the support. So through Turtle Rock, not too many issues. And heading over to GT. GT is a lot of fun, both as a runner and both to watch. It's basically a room that's, a dungeon that's just full of every enemy, every puzzle, has all the light world bosses in it, including each one has a little twist to it as well. So it's the first light world bosses with twists, with a little twist to it. So lots of cool little rooms. So yeah, definitely cool to watch a really, really good player fly through it at top speed. Obviously, we need all the crystals to open Ganon's tower. There's a lot of keys in Ganon's tower that you kind of like to grab. There is 3 different variations that people tend to go for. So each one costing, from around a second to double-digit frames. But a second in this game can be a lot for some people, and for others not so much. As you get to the top level of running here, every single second it's harder to get, and you get into counting frames and single-digit frames per room, and it's a highly optimized game. So we're getting through the first half no problem. We're going to see him. So each one of these teleport screens is around 2 seconds or so, and you actually see him going to bonk over this teleport. So that little bonk there, funnily enough, saves around 5 seconds, because if you don't and you hit the warp, you end up having to do 2 screen transitions. So it just kind of gives you an idea of every single time screen transitions that you don't need to. It's 2 seconds each way. So obviously making a mistake and having to transition the screen is costly. So getting into Ice Armos, this is obviously the first boss of the game. And fighting Armos with silvers, so usually you can get a 6 hits in there quite casually, but pretty sure Fricker not used to, because usually we don't have these silvers in most of the categories, so some of these fights are a little bit different than normal. So Mimics 1 and 2 will be another one. We usually have regular arrows, which takes 2 hits, but with silvers just requires 1. So getting a nice 10 drop there, not that it's really needed at all. Very nice room. So these rooms are a little bit faster with silvers. Still getting the spike skip. Basically just dashing fast enough that we don't get hit with spikes. Hey, popsicle sticks, and 1 up. Yeah, it does the 1 up. 10 silver arrows is pretty beefy. So we're getting into gauntlets here. Very nice, actually. Definitely another section of the game. Gauntlets 1 through to 5 is from the top level players to the mid level to the beginners and intermediate players. There's a big difference between gauntlets 1 and to 5. Basically, Ganon's tower is the hardest. Very nice silvers there. So the silvers there, so you can kill him with the fire rod in 1 cycle, the same as silvers. But what it does with silvers is allows you to keep your magic bar, and you need your magic bar in order to light the torches in 2 or 3 rooms time, which usually after that you empty your magic bar and then have to pick up the magic bar in the following room, which allows you to, or makes you have to dash across the room, pick it up. But in this category you can skip it all together, which is a pretty beefy time save. So obviously not getting the torchlight there as you would like, but not too many problems. So that's the skip that we were talking about. Usually you have to dash along and get the top right hand pot there. So you'll see he is dropping bombs all over the place. So that is, again, strategical. It's not just laying bombs for fun. What he's actually doing is expending all of the bombs that he doesn't need anymore in order to make his menu 1 click easier. So again, it's very minute time saves, but 1 input obviously saves a few frames, and every frame counts. So that is why you see him laying bombs everywhere. That's a little bit rough. Yeah, that's nothing much you can do about that. Yeah, no hook and through blocks, yep. So Aghanim 2 is the same fight as Aghanim 1, except for there's 3 Aghanims. And there's still blue balls involved with it. Very nice. So we're going to see a lovely 1 heart Ganon. So true test of player skill is to fight Ganon with 1 heart. But I have every faith in Fricker because he's a very good player. Probably done this 1,000 times. So again, this is a completely scripted fight. Scripted fight. Unless you have a bad auto, he's going to have dodgy bat patterns now that I think about it. Interesting game. No, it looks like regular bat patterns. I guess he wasn't in the super tower for long enough. Yeah, I'm using menu buffers there just to make sure he doesn't get hit. One hit basically at any point in this, and obviously he's going to die. So I'm taking a couple extra menus there to make sure the bats don't hit him. Very prevalent thing in Fricker's runs. This is always cool to see. So we're getting on to phase 4. Getting a lot of warps here. So phase 1, phase 2, pretty much scripted. No matter what the RNGs it gives you, you can deal with it. And then this is where it starts to differ a little bit. Oh, very nice with the triple. So getting a pretty good Ganon with a lot of warps. And yeah, GG. Oh, baby, a triple. So coming in around a 137.29.
Yo, dude. What a run. Oh my goodness. Let's never talk about this run ever again. Let's move on to the next run, dude.
So I'll let you talk a little bit about that while I fire up my stream and get ready for our next run.
Yeah, it was a difficult run. I did an extra loop of Ice Palace by accident because I forgot where to go. Who does Ice Palace casually? That dungeon is so tough to get through. And then, of course, I forgot the silvers. And then when I got to the mountain, I'm like, wait a second. Something's not right here. Yeah.